The map is spread across 6 joined cedar tables, weighted at each corner by salt stones the size of fists. Alara's left palm pins the estuary mouth, while her right hand lifts a delivery seal with black tweezers. Wax flakes onto the grain of the wood. Across from her, Orset's one good hand rests on the carved arm of her vote chair, knuckles pale against varnish, jaw locked so hard the muscle jumps near her ear. Morrow stands at Alara's right calf, one clouded eye aimed at the chair where the aunt sits. Entry 14 says 40 casks, Alara says, voice flat enough to cut. She taps the map where the channel narrows. 40 cannot pass this throat at winter tide. 32 can if each cask is bound 2 wide, 4 deep, and hauled by 6 teams. This is my seal. I drafted the shipping marks myself. She flips to the next sheet. Then the next. Then the next. Each with the same rust-red wax and the same 3-gull stamp pressed at a slant no counterfeiter would guess, unless she had held the stamp in hand for years. Entries 15 through 27 repeat the same impossible weight. Grain that did not exist was levied, then taxed, then pledged as military reserve. Morrow throws his head back and bays once, a deep sound that rattles the leaded windows. Sebastian stands behind the high chair, not sitting in it. The old iron circlet of the storm-thrown air hangs in his right hand, not on his brow. Count the fabricated entries aloud, he says to the hall. A clerk in gray counts with shaking fingers, bead by bead on a cord. 1, 2, 3. His voice cracks at 10, steadies at 19, stops at 27. The last bead clicks like a tooth. 27 fraudulent grain ledgers, Sebastian says, presented under Orset's authority. Orset rises, shoulders square despite the pin of silver shame clipped to her sleeve by 2 wardens. Even now she wields humiliation like a blade, chin up as if she is choosing this posture, not enduring it. Your omen bride teaches arithmetic, nephew, she says. Will she command storms too? Alara does not look away from her. I am not his omen. The air tightens. Elir, gray robes hemmed with tarnished bells, steps into the aisle holding an empty chain where a seal had hung a year before. Witnessed omen fulfilled, the seer says, and every bell on the hem trembles when they breathe. The mapmaker without witness stands witnessed. Custom binds me outward now. You would leave at this hour? Orset asks, contempt wrapped in silk. Elir lifts both hands, palms out, showing no rings, no token of court office. A seer who stays after fulfillment becomes a second crown. Exile prevents that. Sebastian's gaze flicks once to Alara. The hall will remember this moment, he says, and then it will decide. He raises his voice. War levy requires 9 votes of 13. Cast. Wooden rods drop into copper urns one by one, each strike a hard metallic note. Alara's pulse beats at the base of her throat so sharply she feels it against her collar. 8 dark rods. 5 pale. The levy fails. Orset's smile breaks at the edge. Sebastian turns to the oath dais. Bring her forward. A full hall watches as Alara takes 3 steps, then 4, then the 5th, that places her at the carved stone circle where she once stood, dragged and mocked. Morrow pads beside her and sits, shoulder touching the hem of her coat. By choice, Sebastian says, voice carrying to the back pillars. Not omen, not claim, not coercion. Ilara Ven, will you stand as oath partner and co-rule with me before these witnesses? The bell above them is still vibrating from the vote. Her fingers curl once, then open. Yes, she says, by choice. The ring he offers is iron darkened with ink, not gold. A year earlier, wax was still warm on a chain no one had opened. In year 742, the archive smelled of lamp smoke and damp cloth because rain had crept under a cracked shutter and spotted 3 shelves of tide charts. Ilara was not there. Sebastian was 15 and all elbows, standing where told with his thumbs hooked under his belt so no one could see them shake. Elir set a narrow brass capsule onto the slate table and dripped black wax over the seam, then pressed the seer's sigil into it with a square ring. "The wording?" Sebastian asked. "I do not author," Elir said. "I witness." Lightning flashed through the high-slit window, and for an instant the room's iron fixtures shone white. Elir wound the capsule into a chain of 7 links, each link stamped with the date in tiny numerals, 742. One witness from each house leaned in to inspect. The chain passed hand to hand, click by click, until it returned to the table untouched by knife or heat. "Say it once for the record," an elder from the benches murmured. Elir looked at the young heir and spoke in a voice so quiet the rain had to pause to let it through. "The mapmaker without witness." Sebastian frowned as if tasting a word he disliked. "Is that a person or a warning?" Elir did not answer, because seers in this court answered nothing beyond an omen seen. They wrapped the chain in linen, marked it with the year, and locked it in the frost coffer beneath the throne hall, where old statutes and bad bargains slept. Years passed in practical things: breakwater repairs, disputed catches, winter stores, and petitions tied in blue string. Sebastian learned how to stand still in arguments until people spoke the truth to fill the silence. Orset learned where each vote bent and where it snapped. Ilara, in the tide archive by the harbor stairs, learned the slope of every inlet by the shape of drift left after storms. She worked with compass ink permanently under her nails and a leather thumb guard polished by use. Her maps were blunt instruments made precise by obsession, soundings marked to half-arm depth, shoals crosshatched, currents arrowed with dates and moon phase. Delivery seals came to her desk before any grain ship unloaded, because her chart marks determined where a barge could dock without grinding its belly open. No one in the high hall said her name unless they needed numbers. Year 754 came with knife-bright cold, and the frost convocation packed the same hall where the sealed omen waited under stone. Treaties were read at long tables draped in navy wool, bowls of pickled herring sweated beside braised roots, and black bread scored in 6 lines. Candles smoked in iron candelabra because drafts from the north doors leaned every flame eastward. Ilara arrived carrying 2 rolled harbor charts tied with green cord. She expected to stand at the sidewall, answer one question about winter depth at Pier 4, and return before dark to her desk. Instead, when dessert bowls were cleared and cups replenished with hot spiced wine, Sebastian lifted his hand for silence and signaled to bring the frost coffer. Orset watched from 3 chairs down, smiling with her mouth and not with her eye. "At a treaty banquet?" she said softly. "Nephew, drama does not amend numbers." Sebastian set the coffer key on the table so everyone saw it. "We amend what governs us." He opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in linen gone yellow at the folds, lay the chain from 742. Elir stepped forward, bells at the hem giving 1 small chime per step. Witnesses from each bench crowded near. The black wax remained whole, sigil intact. "Seal chain unbroken," said one witness. "Witnessed," said another. Sebastian broke the wax with the tip of a dinner knife. Elir took the brass capsule, opened it, and drew out a strip of vellum no wider than 2 fingers. "The mapmaker without witness," they read. No one moved for one breath. Then chairs scraped. Murmurs rose. One of Orset's supporters laughed once, sharp and ugly. "A mapmaker? From the harbor stairs?" Orset did not laugh. She stood, lifted her cup high enough for all to see, and pitched the contents onto the flags before the dais. "Bring your mapmaker then," she said. "Let us witness the clerk the sea chose." 2 wardens went to fetch Ilara from the side wall before she could refuse. "Ilara Venn," Sebastian said, formal now, and this was the first time half the hall heard her full name. You are named by sealed omen. She yanked her arm free from the warden's grip and straightened her cuff where fingers had wrinkled it. I am named by my own hand on harbor maps, she said. I have never met your seer. The phrase got a few snorts, a few gasps. Someone hissed, unblooded clerk. At that exact moment, Morrow, the old palace hound with one ear split and one eye milk white, crossed the center aisle as if summoned by smell. He sat directly at Alara's boots and leaned his shoulder against her shin. Orset's smile widened. Humiliation, for her, was never random. She used it ceremonially, like polishing a blade before use. If the omen names a dockhand and we crown her, we hand this hall to tide marks and fish scales, she called. Nephew, or does your lineage no longer matter when prophecy flatters your appetite? Sebastian's jaw flexed once. Lineage matters because law says so, he answered. And law contains a right older than your caucus tricks. The room shifted, recognizing danger before he spoke the term. Coercive claim, someone whispered. He did speak it, clear as steel striking stone. I invoke the old claim right to block an immediate coup. The omen named may be secured to the heir pending confirmation, with witness. Orset laughed fully now, delighted. There it is, romance by statute tablet. Alara stared at him as though he had slapped her. You don't get to secure me, she said. It buys time, Sebastian said too fast. Orset has numbers for a seizure vote tonight. How many? Someone shouted from the rear benches. 9 of 13 for war levy and authority transfer, Orset answered before he could. I have 9. She said it like she was reading weather. Sebastian stepped down from the dais, stopping one pace from Alara. I will not touch you, he said quietly. Only hear me. You already invoked ownership in front of everyone. Her voice carried, blade clean. Hear me instead. I reject the claim. In public. Recorded. A clerk's stylus froze, then scratched furiously. The words were entered. Orsa lifted both hands as if applauding theater. Wonderful, she purred. The heir rejected and the omen insulted. Shall we vote now while his prestige bleeds out? Sebastian did not look at his aunt. No vote tonight, he said. By precedent, a rejected coercive claim triggers 1-year stay on seizure motions tied to that claim. Murmurs turned to shocked calculation. Orset's one eye narrowed to a slit. She had known the right. She had not expected him to use the rejection clause as shield. You plan to lose, she said. I plan to keep the hall intact, he replied. Ilara's mouth parted, then closed. He had used her refusal as a legal barricade. The realization left her angry and steadier than she wanted to admit. Elir stepped between them, bells whispering. Witnessed rejection, they said. Witnessed stay. The banquet ended in torn scraps, half-drunk cups, cooled fish, treaty clauses forgotten under candle wax. Alara gathered her scattered compasses from the floor with stiff fingers, while people stared at her openly now, not as clerk, but as Kraken Stone. When she finally reached the west doors, Morrow had already gotten there. He waited, tail thumping once against the jamb, as if this route was his idea. The night after the banquet, archive lamps burned low because whale oil was rationed in winter. Alara stood with her key in the lock, shoulder pressed to cold oak, when a shadow moved at the end of the corridor. Sebastian came alone. No attendants, no insignia except a dark coat dusted at the hem with snow. I asked the watch to keep distance, he said, not to corner you. She opened the archive door half a handspan and stayed in the gap. Shelves behind her carried rolled charts in numbered bins. Brass dividers marked estuary sectors. A slate board listed pending seal checks in chalk. You've cornered me enough in daylight. I know. He rubbed a thumb over a split in his knuckle, old scar turning pale in lamplight. I came to say what I did and did not do. You invoked coercion. I invoked a statute tablet first carved when heirs married for flood walls and field rights. He nodded toward a shelf where legal copies were kept beside navigation logs. The tablet is archived on your level, third aisle, bracket C. You can read the whole line. She almost laughed at the absurdity of citing shelf locations in the middle of anger. I have read it. I copied it for restoration 2 years ago. The script says, secure body and claim. It also says rejection binds a stay. I needed the stay. So you used my body as your lever. His shoulders tightened, then dropped. Yes. The honest answer landed harder than excuses. She leaned her forehead briefly against the edge of the door. Do you hear yourself? Every word. He swallowed. If I had asked in private first, Orset would have forced a seizure vote before dawn. She told me her numbers during caucus. 9 of 13. She said them while smiling. Alara looked up sharply. She told you on purpose. To show I had no moves left. They stood close enough that she could smell iron from wet snow on his coat and ink from her own hands. He lifted one hand slowly, giving her time to flinch away, and stopped with his fingers hovering near her jaw, not touching. The space between skin and skin felt like a wire strung tight. May I? He asked. No. The word came soft but exact. He closed his hand, lowered it, and stepped back 2 paces. Then no. Nothing else needed saying, and yet both remained in the corridor until the lamp on the far wall hissed out. When she finally shut the archive door, the click of the latch sounded too loud. Days folded into ledgers, arguments, and weather. Alara slept badly and worked harder. The missing grain tallies that had first seemed sloppy now looked carved, deliberate. She pulled every delivery seal she had drafted for winter months and laid them by route. 3 gulls stamped with slight tilt. Rope marks recorded at unloading. Tide windows noted in cramped side script. Orset's caucus papers claimed shipments through channels Alara knew were dry at the stated moons. She measured with calipers the width of drawn barges against the real throat of the estuary on her largest chart. Impossible by inches, then by feet, then by entire cask rows. Impossible 27 times. Morrow appeared twice during those nights, always without summons. Once he patted under her table and set his chin on her boot while she compared wax seals. Once he stood in the archive doorway staring down the corridor until a pair of eavesdroppers moved away with guilty haste. The war vote approached like an iron wagon on cobbles. Everyone heard it before seeing it. War levy, 9 of 13 required, and Orset still gathered rods like she collected debts. Sebastian moved from meeting to meeting with control sharpened to a point. He did not seek Alara in public. In private, he sent one note of 7 words. I request speech on vote eve, alone. She almost burned the note, then didn't. On the eve of the vote, snow came hard enough to blur the harbor lights into smears. Alara went to the old chart room above the boathouse because it had a door that stuck in damp weather and no one liked climbing its narrow stairs. A brazier glowed on the far side, heat uneven and metallic. Sebastian arrived carrying no weapon she could see. He set his gloves on the table beside a compass rose carved by some dead hand and waited until she nodded before speaking. I know every reason you should not trust me, he said. You catalogued them in front of me, accurately. He drew a breath that lifted his chest under dark wool. I do not want your usefulness. I want you. The admission landed hard and there was no taking it back. She looked at his face for signs of strategy and found strain instead. A pulse jumping at his throat. A tiny tremor in the fingers he had braced flat on the table. You picked this room because no one can hear us, she said. I picked this room because you can leave from 2 doors if you need to. He glanced toward each one as he said it. I counted. A laugh escaped her, rough and brief, Not kind, but not cruel either. You count exits now. I count consequences now. He held her gaze, then looked down first, as if refusing to trap her in it. When I invoked the right, I treated you as tool and shield. I cannot undo it. I can say plainly that I wanted time, because losing to Orset would have killed any chance of choosing each other at all. She moved around the table slowly, stopping near the brazier. Heat licked one side of her face while the other stayed cold. Choosing each other implies I might choose? I know. She studied him for a long beat. Snow ticked against the window slats. The room smelled of iron, charcoal, and the faint ink scent rising from her sleeves. What happens if I say no now? You walk out. I fight with what remains. And if I say yes? He swallowed. Then we proceed by your terms. No claim right, no omen authority. Public choice. Witnessed. He had given her the language she needed before she asked. That mattered. She stepped nearer, close enough to see pale scars crossing his knuckles like map lines. His breath shifted first, deeper, then held. Her own followed without permission. Pulse climbed in her throat so high she could feel each beat under the skin when she spoke. You make this sound orderly. It won't be. No, she said, voice lower now. It won't. The distance between them narrowed to heat and breath. She became acutely aware of physical facts she could not file away. The worn seam at his shoulder, the smell of wet wool and steel, the way his jaw tightened when he stopped himself from moving too fast. His hand lifted halfway, paused, then opened palm up between them, offering contact instead of taking it. She set her fingers in his hand. Skin against skin sent a sharp line of sensation up her arm. He did nothing else. That restraint, more than any declaration, made her chest ache. She stepped closer until his coat brushed her sleeve. If we cross this, she said, each word measured, succession law binds. Once joined, it cannot be undone without tearing the hall apart. I know the statute, he said. Line 3 after witness clause. You quoted shelf location at my door. I assume you memorized line 3. A breath of a smile, gone quickly. I did. Her free hand rose toward his collar, stopped, then touched lightly at the edge of fabric. His breath changed hers, matching pace for pace. Desire was no longer argument but body. Warmth pooling low, a tremor in her thighs, the urge to close the last inch and erase thought entirely. Instead, she pressed her palm flat to his chest and held him there. Not tonight, she said. Not tonight, he echoed. We stop before consummation. We stop. He closed his eyes once, opened them, and nodded. Because once joined, law locks us. Because consent means choosing the lock with full sight. He bent his forehead toward hers but stopped before contact, waiting. She met him the final fraction, skin to skin, brief as struck flint. Then both stepped back at once, breathing hard, hands empty. They left by different doors. In the weeks that followed, they worked like people carrying a fragile vessel through a crowded room. Publicly, Sebastian negotiated votes one by one, refusing private bargains that smelled of Orset's traps. Privately, Alara built the proof chain until each link could bear weight under hostile eyes. She assembled a demonstration no one could dismiss as clerk arithmetic. On one table, harbor maps drawn in her own hand with depth marks dated to each alleged shipment. On another, the 27 entries from grain ledgers, each paired with a wax seal and unloading mark. At the center, a scale model of the estuary throat in carved pine, with movable barge blocks sized to legal casks. Push 40 through, and they jammed. Push 32, and they passed with a finger's breadth to spare. Morrow took to sleeping under that model table, waking whenever someone approached the archive room after midnight. Elir visited once before the second convocation, footsteps soft as worn cloth. They stood by the window where frost made fern patterns on the glass and watched Alara align ledger strips in perfect columns. "You are not here to tell me what to do," Alara said without looking up. "I cannot." Omen's speech ended when it was read aloud last year. Elir touched the empty chain at their belt. "I am here to remind you that custom will send me out once this concludes." You sound relieved. I sound practical. A tiny smile. Courts mistake seers for hammers. Every problem becomes nail-shaped. Alara placed one final seal beside entry 27. "Then go before they grab you for another prediction." "I leave only when witnessed fulfillment is named in the hall." Elir's bells gave a faint metallic whisper as they turned to go. "After that, I walk through the west doors and do not return." War Vote Day opened with hard blue sky and ice on every stair edge. By noon, clouds rolled in and turned the light pewter. The second Frost Convocation in year 755 gathered in the same hall where Alara had been dragged the year before. Same pillars, same bell, same carved stone circle at the dais. Orset arrived in formal black with a silver clasp shaped like a thorn. She moved through the aisle as if she owned the floorboards. Sebastian stood at the head without crown, iron circlet on the table to his right. Elir took a place near the west doors, already facing partly outward. The first order was levy. Again, 9 votes needed to pass war funding and emergency command expansion. Rods dropped into urns. Count came to 8, dark, 5 pale. Levy failed by 1. Orset's mouth thinned, but she recovered instantly. "Without levy, border stores empty by thaw," she said. "Choose sentiment if you wish." Sebastian raised a hand. "Second order, allegations of ledger fraud under caucus authority." He looked to Alara. "Present." Alara stepped forward, unrolled the first chart, and weighted corners with salt stones. The room had seen these tables before. Now she turned them into witness tools. She began with what no one could dispute. "This is Harbor Approach North, Revision Winter 754, drafted and sealed by me." She held up her stained thumb guard. "This leather mark matches the pressure nick on every seal imprint from that season. These are original." She moved through entries methodically, never rushing, each statement tied to object and number. Entry 3 claims 38 casks through Channel B at dead low. Channel B depth that date. 1 arm and 2 fingers. Required for loaded barge. 2 arms, minimum. Impossible. She set the strip down. Entry 9 claims 42 casks at Pier 2. Pier 2 ice shearing closed docking for 6 days, recorded by harbor bell logs. Orset interrupted on entry 11. "Any map can be redrawn to accuse." "Then test this one." Ilara gestured to the carved model. 40 casks in legal dimensions. Move them through." A skeptical delegate shoved blocks into the pine channel. They wedged hard halfway, then tipped. He tried again with fewer. 32 passed. Murmurs turned from doubt to calculation. Alara placed the final ledger strip on the table. Entries 1 through 27 are fabricated quantities used to inflate levy urgency and purchase votes with promised rations. Morrow rose from beside her and gave a long bay that rolled against the rafters. It was not command-trained, just timing that felt like judgment. Sebastian spoke into the echo. "Dame Orset, do you deny authority over these entries?" Second use of her full name landed like a ceremonial blow. Orset straightened to full height. "I deny criminal intent. Numbers were adjusted in anticipation of losses." "Anticipation is not inventory," Alara said. Sebastian nodded to the clerks. "By hall rule, fraudulent war provisioning strips voting privilege on related motions pending censure." He looked directly at Orset. "Your vote is removed now." A warden stepped forward with the silver shame pin and fixed it to Orset's sleeve in view of all. She did not flinch. Humiliation again became weapon. She made the pin look like an ornament she had chosen, but her one eye glittered with murder. "You strip me and think yourself clean?" she said to Sebastian. "You used a coercive right on the very woman you now parade as virtue." The accusation hung, thick and hot. Ilara answered before Sebastian could. "He did. I rejected him publicly. Recorded by this hall. That rejection stayed your seizure vote and kept your coup from legal cover." Shock rippled through benches where some had never understood that turn. Orset's composure cracked for one heartbeat. Small, but real. Ilir stepped from the door shadow, bells ringing once. "Witnessed omen fulfilled," they said, voice carrying to every corner. Mapmaker stood without witness. Now witness holds the hall. Custom exiles seer at fulfillment. No one blocked them as they crossed the aisle. At the west doors, Ilir paused and looked back only once, not at throne or banners, but at Alara. Then they passed into snow and vanished. With Orset's vote removed, the count on emergency command collapsed. Her caucus splintered instantly. Several delegates stepped away from her bench before the clerks even finished recording. Sebastian did not gloat. He simply moved to the oath dais and set the iron circlet down beside the old statute tablet brought from archive bracket C. "This hall witnessed her diminishment in this same space," he said. "This hall will witness restoration in this same space." He looked at Alara, not touching. "By choice, not omen. By consent, not claim. Will you stand as oath partner and co-rule?" She heard in the question every room between then and now. Archive door cold under her palm, brazier heat on her face, his halted hand, her own stop command answered without argument. She stepped into the stone circle. "Yes," she said, "by choice." The oath required joined hands over iron and salt, their fingers interlaced. A clerk recited succession clauses, including the one they had halted for. Once joined and consummated under witness, succession lock became irrevocable except by civil fracture. Ilara repeated each line clearly. Sebastian repeated after her, voice steady. Orset laughed once, a broken sound. "Two fools choosing chains." Ilara turned her head just enough to meet the aunt's eye. "I would rather enter a bond I chose than live under arrangements you hid." The hall inhaled as one body, then exhaled into applause that began scattered and grew. Not all hands joined, but enough did. Morrow pressed against Ilara's leg and sat on her boot like he had done the first time, only now no one called her unblooded clerk. After the convocation, Orset was escorted to the lower gallery to await censure terms. She went upright, sleeve pin catching candlelight. Sebastian did not watch her leave. His focus stayed on the people still in the hall, answering 3 questions about grain redistribution, 2 about harbor security, 1 about spring dredging. The work of co-rule began while the chamber was still noisy. Dusk turned the high windows violet. The last delegates filed out with boots clacking on stone. Servants cleared cups. Clerks stacked tally rods into bundles of 13 and tied them with twine. No one mentioned prophecy anymore. They mentioned transport routes, ration schedules, and which pier braces needed replacing before thaw surge. Alara gathered her charts from the cedar tables. Her shoulders ached, forearms streaked with graphite and wax. Sebastian came around the end of the table carrying the iron circlet still not on his head. "You never put that on," she said. He held it up, considering. "It sits differently now. You still need a symbol." "I have one." He glanced at her ink-stained hands. She snorted softly. "Ink is not ceremonial metal. It governs ships better." They walked the center aisle together without hurry. Near the west doors, cold air knifed in from gaps around the hinges. Snow had stopped. The courtyard beyond gleamed under moonlight. At the threshold where Ilir had departed, Sebastian paused. "We honored custom," he said quietly. "We did." She looked into the dark where the seer had gone. No second crown. He nodded once, accepting the loss and necessity. Later, in the private chamber adjoining the archive, not bedchamber, not yet, they sat across a narrow table and ate thick lentil stew from chipped bowls because both had missed midday meal. Morrow lay between them, paws twitching in sleep. Every few bites, Sebastian pushed one crust toward the hound without looking down. Every time, Morrow took it delicately. They discussed grain truths first. 27 fraudulent entries removed left a shortfall they could not pretend away. Ilara proposed staggered ration release tied to actual dock receipts by route. Sebastian added storm reserve from palace stores and mandatory public postings of weekly tallies at the harbor bell so no caucus could hide numbers again. No dramatic music filled the room, only spoon against ceramic and the low crackle from a small hearth. When practical matters were set, silence arrived, but not the old brittle kind. "About line 3, she said at last. His spoon paused. "You decide timing." "I do." She met his eyes and held it. "Soon. Not under exhaustion and not as punctuation to a vote." A breath left him that might have been relief or gratitude. "Agreed." She reached across and touched the back of his hand, firm, deliberate. He turned his palm up and threaded fingers with hers. No tremor now, just warmth and weight. Night deepened. Outside, meltwater dripped from eaves at regular intervals, counting time more honestly than any court clock. They moved eventually from table to window, from window to the worn bench under the archive lamps, talking in fragments about childhood storms and first maps and the particular misery of wet boots in winter. Bodies leaned, then rested. Mouths met once, then again, unhurried. When they finally chose to cross the legal threshold they had named, they did so with full witness already behind them and no force ahead of them. The choice was made in low light with careful words between touches, and with pauses where either could stop and was heard. After, Ilara lay with her cheek against his shoulder and listened to his heartbeat settle under her ear, steady as a harbor bell after wind. Morning came with routine waiting for them. By first light, co-ruling looked like ink, boots, and weather reports. Sebastian took petitions in the east alcove while Ilara reviewed revised shipping lanes in the archive. At noon, they met in the hall to announce immediate appointments by function, not faction. With Orset stripped of vote pending censure, her bloc fractured further, and most chose pragmatism over loyalty to a fallen broker. When Orset was brought for formal censure, she wore plain gray and the silver shame pin from yesterday. She faced them with the same feral dignity, but the teeth had less bite without numbers behind them. "You think this ends me?" she said. "It ends your vote," Sebastian answered. "It does not erase your blood." Ilara added, "It also ends hidden ledgers. Weekly tallies go public at the harbor bell." Orset's laugh was tired now. "The clerk still loves her lists." "This coast runs on posted counts and records," Ilara said. "You taught me that by trying to weaponize them." Orset looked from one to the other and, for the first time, seemed to understand she had lost not to prophecy, but to two people who had stopped treating law like theater. She bowed, tiny, grudging, and was escorted out to house confinement pending term review. The storm-thrown chamber changed in small visible ways over the next 10 days. The single high chair remained, but a second seat of equal height was placed beside it, plain oak rather than carved ebony, at Ilara's insistence that new authority should not counterfeit old lineage. The vote urns were relocated to center floor, where all could see rods dropped. The archived statute tablet on coercive claim was displayed once during reforms, then returned to bracket C with an addendum requiring explicit consent clauses for any future invocation. Morrow adopted a routine. Mornings near the east alcove, afternoons under Ilara's map table, evenings at whichever doorway held harder truth. When arguments rose, he would stand and move to the person closest to conceding something real. Clerks began saying, half joking, Watch the hound. He knows where the break is. 1 week after the second convocation, snow melted enough to reveal dark cobbles in the courtyard. Alara and Sebastian crossed them at dusk to inspect harbor postings. A crowd had gathered around the tally board: dock workers, fishwives, 2 soldiers off watch, children in patched mittens. Numbers in thick charcoal listed incoming grain by vessel and route, with deficits marked plainly. No one cheered. They nodded, asked pointed questions, and took answers. She read that response as a cautious form of trust. People came back the next day to compare figures and see whether explanations held. At the harbor rail, wind shoved spray high enough to salt their sleeves. Sebastian leaned both hands on wet wood and looked out at anchored barges. "When I was younger," he said, "I thought ruling meant forcing the right outcome before others noticed." Ilara snorted. "Now? Now it means answering in public and not lying when the answers are hard." She bumped her shoulder lightly against his. "Progress." By late thaw, news came that Ilir had reached the inland monastery route, where exiled seers winter and teach weather reading to shepherds. No letter, only traveler report, but enough. Ilara felt an odd gratitude for the absence. Without seer presence, decisions in the hall had no prophetic shadow to hide behind. Spring hearings opened with both co-rulers seated publicly, as promised at the convocation. Sebastian wore the iron circlet once for formal inheritance rights, then set it between the chairs instead of reclaiming center. Alara wore no crown at all, only her leather thumb guard tucked into her belt like a private emblem. During one long petition day, a delegate attempted to invoke fated union to rush a controversial dock tax. Alara cut him off with a tap of stylus on wood. "Do not use our marriage as precedent for bypassing consent. Bring numbers." The hall laughed, then quieted, then brought numbers. By mid-spring, the 19-year drought of repaired breakwater grants ended under their joint vote. By early summer, ration riots predicted by Orset did not occur. Shortages hurt, yes, but transparent postings and corrected routes prevented panic runs. Even those who disliked Alara admitted ships grounded less when maps were obeyed. At twilight on the first clear evening after thaw, they returned to the throne hall alone. Candles were unlit. Only west light washed the stone in pale gold. The carved circle at the dais held faint scuffs from a year of boots, wardens, and witness crowds. Alara stopped where she had once been dragged, and then where she had stood by choice. The difference lived in her body now, shoulders no longer hunched, breath no longer trapped high and thin. Sebastian came to stand beside her, not in front. "You remember the cup Orset threw?" he said, glancing at a stain long scrubbed but not erased in grout lines. "I remember my compasses on the floor." She looked down at her hands, turned them palm up, then down. "I remember saying no." He nodded slowly. "When you said no, it changed what could happen after." She took his hand. "And you're hearing it." Morrow settled at her heel with a heavy sigh, chin on her boot, the familiar weight anchoring stone to flesh. Outside, somewhere beyond the west doors, the harbor bell rang once for tide change, and the sound traveled through the hall like weather finally turning.